continue this conversation about the virtue and value of men.
Hello, Lisa.
Last time we talked, you issued a little bit of a challenge,
Mhm.
encouraging us to look for examples in the world, in the media, in life, whatever, of men doing good things. And I'm curious, what'd you come up with? Did you see some good stuff?
I did. I did. Yeah, I talked about last time how this fundamentally shifted my way of seeing men in the world by challenging myself to walk out of my door and see what was really happening and not listening to what media said or what other people said or what my girlfriend said or what I was taught or what I read about men, but to watch them in the wild in front of me, seeing what was happening. And so, yeah, so I took that challenge up again this week and saw all kinds of great things, with my clients and with men that I talked to for my business and interviewed. So many things. My business is Her Dad, so I work what's called Her Dad, and so I work with men who are raising daughters or who have adult daughters. So a lot of what I saw this week was around men being dads,
Mm,
and that's in a lot of ways kind of the ultimate expression of men are good, seeing men as dads, especially dads to daughters. There's just so much instinct to protect and so much instinct to teach and to provide. I was talking to a man this week, interviewing him, and just hearing him talk about how much thought he put into the way he was raising his daughter, the intention he put behind it. And it was so interesting because it was a very masculine kind of approach. It was very methodical and it was very laid out and thought through and analytical. And so it was, bringing the best of some of the highly masculine qualities. But he was very intentional about adapting them to her
mm.
and to bringing those to her in a way that she could receive them as a girl and she's also a child, she's 8. So it was an incredible conversation and just seeing how his utter and total devotion to her and just the way he wanted to take, his life and his experience and his skills in his work and use those to bring everything to bear for his daughter's benefit. So just an incredible instinct, incredible example of a man's instinct to protect and provide and nurture. It was really beautiful. That was one of the great things I saw this week.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for
Mm.
sharing. And I think you're right that there is such an opportunity for expression about kind of the wholeness and richness of what it means to be a good man when you're seeing someone be a good father.
Yeah.
And, we all know experiences of dads who maybe aren't, and typically, or at least, it seems that that sometimes comes from an unhealed place within the man
Mhm.
himself, that then, the whole idea of if you don't heal what hurt you, you'll bleed on the people who didn't cut you. And the idea of wanting to protect or prevent that from happening to children. And so hearing you, talk about a guy who's standing in his full dadness.
Yeah. Yeah. It's,
That's beautiful.
who maybe are coming from a little bit more of a wounded place and are kind of missing the mark with their daughters. You see a lot of that there's some missed places there. And yet their instinct, the fact that they're working with me, that to improve their relationship with their daughter, even that alone, the fact that they're willing to talk to this person that they, barely know to find out how can I do better? I want to be the kind of dad that she needs and I don't know how. So can you help me? To me, like a man that's willing to be vulnerable and to ask me if I can come in and be an ally with him on that journey. Like to me, that's just an incredible example of how men are good. Men in general like want to help.
Mhm.
They want to help. They want to provide. They want to fix in general, and it can be hard for them to ask for help. So, anytime a man has the courage to come and talk with me, I just think it's just an incredible example of a man being good for sure.
'Cause truth is there is no instruction manual. either to being a dad or being a good man or being a dad trying to raise a daughter solo or even with someone else. There is no instruction manual. And even when men have incredible role models growing up in their own family, their own fathers, grandfathers, uncles, friends, whatever, times change. And
Yeah.
so when we think about raising daughters or just interacting with people in general in today's world versus, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, it's a different ballgame.
It
And
absolutely, yeah, it
being willing
is.
to reach out and find, people who can help navigate. Even though there's the stereotype that men don't like to ask for directions, in this case, how do I help navigate this relationship with my daughter or with whomever in life, or even with
Yeah.
myself? Men asking that question,
Mm,
how do I navigate my relationship with myself? That to me is such a sign of courage. And
absolutely.
I look at the men in my own program through the group calls when they start becoming more open to share and to be vulnerable, with about themselves, with each other, in the group. There's so much growth happening, but also such, an indication that that safe environment isn't available for a whole lot of men.
Yeah.
You know, for us women, we can find it or create it pretty easily, but for guys, it's kind of a different deal.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine some of the amazing things that you see in your work, working more, as you said, with men about their connection with themselves, not necessarily with an external person. How beautiful that is, and something that occurs to me listening to you talk. I think I've shared with you before. I've followed the work of Alison Armstrong, who does a lot about understanding men, especially helping women to understand men. And she talks about this concept of waiting for the well, about, like you said, for women in general, our emotions and things like that, they're a little closer to the surface. We
Mhm.
can in general access them a little more easily. Well, for men, just biologically, otherwise, in general, and because of social conditioning, their emotions are deeper in the well. And so there has to be a period of time given for those to rise. So, and that needs some space and silence and just presence. Them to learn that with themselves or for people who are accompanying them. And, it's not an intuitive understanding. I didn't understand that. But ever since understanding that and using that concept with men, it's amazing. And I think that men don't often get those spaces where someone will wait for the well. They're not taught to wait for the well with themselves. And then there aren't that many people who know how to do that with them. So an example is just, if I'm having kind of getting into some deeper emotional terrain with a man, my instinct used to be like ask more questions or kind of lean in a little bit more. But what I've learned now is like lean back and just like, because I can literally, I envision it like a well rising, like I'm watching him and kind of seeing like the emotion just needs time and space to rise to the surface. And so I think fundamentally, there just aren't many spaces where men have the opportunity to have that space. And so a lot of times it never gets there. It never comes to the surface to their own awareness where they can really tune in and feel it and kind of be with it within themselves, or where someone else gets to hear them verbalize it or share that with them. So I'm curious in your work with men, what's that like? Do you
Well,
see anything like that?
yeah, today, our entire conversation, our group calls are on today. It happened earlier, and the whole conversation was around the concept of surrender.
Mm.
And that is not a phrase that many men that I know really like to embrace. What do you mean surrender? Because often it's seen as throwing in the towel or waving the white flag or
Right.
giving up or, quitting or whatever. And in this case, the idea was surrendering the tight grip of the ego and fear and the need to control in order to align more with the soul.
Mm.
And so very much a concept of like spiritual surrender. And in talking through that, it was just a fascinating conversation. And, yeah, I'm doing a whole series on YouTube about this particular topic because it really went deep. And right now, we're being asked more than I've seen in a long time to be willing to release and surrender all that's not serving us so we
Yeah.
can step into a brighter future unencumbered by all the crap that makes us feel bad, so that we make space for stuff that helps us to feel good and be in alignment with, with our real purpose and why we're here. And
Mhm.
so often, so many of the men I've talked to recently, it's almost like this feeling of their happiness is irrelevant,
Right.
that they've got this, sacrifice mentality, do what needs to be done for the family, and my happiness, my joy, whatever, doesn't count.
Mhm. Yeah.
That breaks my heart. It sincerely does. It breaks my heart, because men have a right to be happy and feel joy too.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. I think that, there is a lot of conditioning around what I think is kind of a beautiful aspect of the masculine to sacrifice, right? Like that to sacrifice for one's family, for one's community, and things like that to give, and that's such a beautiful impetus of so many men that I see around me. I mean, all around us, we see examples of men sacrificing and serving in those ways. And I think it does get taken too far because there's not a counter message that's coming their way. And so, what I've experienced in speaking to a lot of men is that that message gets taken to an extreme and unchecked by a counterbalanced message. Counterbalanced message being like, yes, sacrifice to the extent that it serves you and those around you and no further. So, unchecked, that message looks like sacrifice until you die of depletion, acute misery, sexlessness, whatever. And so I see this showing up, and I know, I've talked about this in men that will say, like, I will stay in any situation, whether it's a horrible job situation or a bad marriage, because I was taught that I have to sacrifice, that that's what men do. And that's what it means to be a good man.
Mm.
Right. So this is around this idea, this kind of thing that good men do this and one of the good ones and all these things, that to be a good man, I have to sacrifice until I just bleed because, like you said, like my happiness is completely irrelevant. Well, the message that men don't receive that counter that and kind of put a check and balance on that is that actually, if you go past the point of where this serves you and those around you, it becomes a liability. We're moving over to the liability side of the balance sheet because, a man who is deeply unhappy, unfulfilled, becomes angry and resentful and, can be venomous and can lead all the way to violence in some cases. Like, these are some of the things that we start to see when men aren't encouraged to sacrifice to a point and no further, and given a message that it's okay to prioritize investing in themselves, investing in their happiness, investing in their well-being. And right now in our culture all around, that message is supported, that just shut up, just shut up, take your lumps.
Yeah.
Nobody needs to hear about it. So I think it is very, it breaks my heart too, to see that men get this message, but there's like another part to it. It reminds me of I saw a quote one time when I was younger, and I decided to live my life by this quote. Okay. 15 years later, I was in a bookstore and I saw the quote. Well, there was a whole second part to that quote that I never knew was there that completely changed the meaning of the whole thing. And like, it changed my life. And I feel like that's what men get. Like, they get like one portion of the quote without the second part, to make it a complete thing. Just as sacrifice, but it's like sacrifice until the point that it doesn't serve anyone anymore. So that's what I would like, this message to be to men. Like, Sacrifice to a point and no further.
Yes. Well, one of the things I wrote about in my first book was the idea of, like, selfless service, which
Mm,
put on a pedestal and think it's Mother Teresa kind of stuff. This is the stuff that, saints and angels are made out of, but it's also the stuff that depletes us, that drains
yeah.
us dry, and so the counterbalance to that being, like, soulful service, and what are the ways
Mm,
that we can show up and serve regardless of gender, regardless of how we're serving in family, at work, in the community, whatever, but in a way that also fills our cup back up so that we're serving from the overflow rather than trying to serve
mhm,
from the empty cup. And, when you asked about what have you seen in terms of men doing good in the world, this conversation led me to a video that I saw from an online, social media friend, and it was his first video, and he was talking about how he had been so driven by work, and
mm,
because he saw that as, like, his way of caring for his family, everything else, but, like, the constant to-do list in the head and preoccupation with the job all the time, till one day he's walking outside. I think he's got 4 daughters, 4 or 5, and, of course, reminding me of you,
yeah.
but as he's walking outside and, to-do list running through his brain, he's totally disconnected from what's going on until his youngest daughter came and grabbed his hand and wanted
Mm,
to hold his hand while they walked. And it's like in that moment, he said, he was talking about that his perspective shifted. And there was such a desire to be present and to be there for his girls, in a way that he knew he hadn't been.
mm,
And because he was so fixated on the on checking all the boxes, I guess, of the expectation while missing out on why he was doing all that in the first place, which was
yeah.
right there beside him wanting to hold his hand. And, that yeah, that was touching to me because I thought, "Wow," you know, um
Yeah. That's beautiful. I think I'm talking to a lot of people, a lot of women and men in general. Like, I think what most people want from the men in their life is their presence. Like, but really their presence, not just like them physically being there. And I don't think that men get that message much. Like that's what people really want from you is you, because there are so many conditioning messages about protecting and providing and all these things, and just like those are amazing traits, but unchecked and unbalanced and taken to the extreme, they just lead to depletion or an over identification with doing and work and all of those things, to where those become an obsession too. So yeah, so I know that you and I've talked, and we both feel so strongly about just continuing to resonate with this message about, that men, it's okay to be happy. It's okay to prioritize your happiness. It's okay to prioritize investing in yourself. It's okay to prioritize asking people to listen to you, to be there for you, to wait for the well with you or for you. And it's okay to expect to have those things prioritized in all of your relationships, that you matter, and that when you are, as Lisa uses the term, when your cup is full, you serve the world in a much bigger way. So if that's what motivates you the most, then I guess that's my message to men, is that, you are of great service to this world when you are feeling fulfilled and happy and all of those good things too. And I know that you don't get that message much. You look in any women's magazine and we're targeted all the time, reminded about self care and all of these things. Not to say we all do it very well. And women need this message too, because we are encouraged to deplete ourselves all the time.
Yeah,
Um, but I do see pervasively as a woman that we are targeted with that message. I never see that coming at men. I never hear men talk about that. It's very, very rare. So I think it is important that, that as many of us as possible can give men that message.
yeah. Not only, and this is for people of either gender, but not only do we not have to set ourselves on fire to keep our family warm, but also we need to do things to make sure that we're stoking our own inner fire as
Yeah.
well, and not allowing that spark, that passion, that thing that uniquely makes us us to drown out or be suffocated or just die,
Mm.
in the midst of all the doing and forgetting sometimes about the being. Who do I want to be to the people in my life? Who do I want to be, in this world? And yeah,
That's
encouraging and
beautiful.
especially on that path, I think is important. And one other thing just to mention, I've had several friends um, within the past couple of years, especially who it's clear they're miserable, just miserable in their situations, whether it's job or family or whatever. And I know that many of us think that to stay in an unsatisfying situation for the family is the noble thing to do. And not once do I think the kids in that situation don't pick up on the misery,
Oh, yeah.
and
Oh,
I
yeah.
think we talked about that a little bit before, and it's not like I'm advocating necessarily, "Burn the boat and get the hell out," but there's a point at which, the sacrifice and the misery does affect everyone around you, um, and to the extent that that can be shifted in a positive way, either within the situation, by making a concerted effort to shift things, or outside the situation, there is an opportunity for people to feel a positive shift there too. And I know that that's dangerous territory to kind of talk about, just the taboos in our culture about what's appropriate and what's not. But abject misery and disconnection, complete disconnection, um, that's no fun for anybody, man or woman or
Yeah.
child.
No, no, the world doesn't need any more miserable people, like man,
Really.
woman, or child. Like, and so I guess that's it. It's like, if not for yourself and prioritizing yourself and your right to be happy and fulfilled, I guess it's like, realize that, you know, you're not serving the world to
Yep.
be in a miserable situation. I think it's just sort of a general statement. And particularly for men, again, who get that message constantly about sacrifice. That's what it means to be a good man. You sacrifice, or you sacrifice. It doesn't serve anybody. I had a career in the corporate world and was often working with management, and a lot of times when there were employees that needed to be let go, it was just a horrible situation. And I would work with managers who would just forever, oh no, I can't lay them off. They've got a family, and just take on this real, like, I gotta sacrifice. They're making me crazy and they're making us lose money, but I can't do that to them. I can't do that to them. And I finally got to where I would coach them to understand this one thing, that I guarantee you that person is not happy. If we are at the point where all these things are happening, that person is not happy. And almost every time, without exception, whenever that person eventually got laid off, they went on to a better situation. Almost every time, in every situation that I followed. And so I got to a point of total confidence when I was coaching managers. Like, I guarantee you, I see how hard this is, and you just think that you just got to take it on the chin, but you're not serving this person. You're not serving your company. That person's not happy. And so I think I've seen that in relationships too, and working with my clients. Like, if you're not happy, like, guaranteed that these other people, your daughter, whomever, isn't happy either. So I see how it gets painted with a brush of virtue, this whole sacrifice thing,
Uh-huh.
but it's not serving anyone.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's hard. The idea of trying to do what you think is the right thing for someone else.
Yeah.
You never really know what the right thing
Right.
is for them, but so often we do know in our gut, in our body, our intuition. And for me, one of the biggest, in my opinion, um, travesties almost. I mean, I that's a big word, and I'll use it in this
Mhm.
instance, is almost like a societal desire to cut men off from their own inner knowing, from their
Yeah.
intuitive nature, from their feeling nature, from, the part of them that is the deeper wisdom that can help with the problem solving, the
Yeah.
seeing all the things beyond the ego. And but as a society, it's like we've cut that off in such a way that oh, that's one of the things I help men learn how to do, is how to
Yeah.
tap back into that, how to tap back into their inner knowing, their, their inner vision, all of that, tap back into their soul so that they've got all of that power to help make decisions that can be for a most benevolent outcome. Not aligned with ego, not aligned with, "Ooh, I need to protect somebody against themselves," or things like that, but what is the highest and best possible outcome? Um, and that to me is just so important moving forward, and oftentimes that starts with helping men tap back into what brings you joy. In our call
Yeah.
today, it was so funny. The guys on the call, one has really been talking about joy and finding joy, and that's been kind of my encouragement to him. He's like, "Where the hell do I even look for that?" And he said that, like, just yesterday, he was driving behind a dump truck and he was talking about, the 6-inch I don't know all the words, but 6-inch, like, tailpipe or whatever on the dump truck, and the diesel smell and all these things. He was like, "This joy just welled up inside." He was like, "That right there." I felt a sense of joy from that, and I'm like, "Oh my god, wherever you can find it,"
Right.
off a dump truck with, that smells like diesel, then awesome. But he had a background as a diesel mechanic, and that was part of his field, and he had just moved and shifted, he's looking at new career and stuff like that. And so just tapping into that. But one of the things we talked about is how so often like anger or frustration or these other things can be triggered. And when those are triggered, it's like we tend to stay in them for a while sometimes. But when joy is triggered, for some people it's more fleeting.
Oh, yeah.
Like, we don't stay in the joy quite as much. And so that might be one of my encouragements, for people, but especially for men. If you can find that thing that brings you joy, whatever that trigger might be, and allow that feeling to be what propels, or is the underlying of decision making or interactions or whatever, instead of anger, frustration, fear, all the stuff that doesn't feel good. Man, that's a game changer.
Yeah, moving towards joy instead of away from anger and pain and all those things. Yeah, that's an incredible message, and I love the work that you're doing with men, sort of returning them to themselves and facing them inward, instead of the outward performing and doing and providing and all of those things that they're so often encouraged to do. Yeah, I think to do anything that we can to help men reconnect with themselves is just, it's something I want to be a part of, and I'm working to contribute my piece to. And it's something that really drives me with working with dads of daughters, because there's a lot of, yes, I work with dads and it's about their daughters on the surface, right? Because that's what they're there for, and that's what the identified kind of need is.
Yep.
But what really compels me is a lot of the deeper things that we get to work on while we're working on their relationship with their daughter, because it is, in tuning into their daughter, it's asking them to tune into themselves. It's asking them to be more attuned. They have to be more attuned to themselves to be able to tune into their daughters. And it's also asking them to tune into the feminine nature within themselves. We all have feminine and masculine natures within ourselves.
Yep.
So, I think that what you and I are doing, both in our different ways, is a way of companioning men on the journey of tuning into themselves and tuning into some of what may be more feminine aspects of their whole expression. And to me, there's nothing more incredible than seeing a man like discover like his full range and his right to have his full range of emotions, of being, of all of that. So yeah, I know that's something that has connected both of us, just feeling so strongly that men have a right to happiness, to being fulfilled, to their entire range of everything within themselves, and to really be a stand for a message that's different than single noted, be like this is what it means to be a good man, sacrifice until you die, like you said, burn yourself to keep your family warm. Like, these are terrible, terrible single noted messages that I don't want to be a part of anymore.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, and as someone who also, certainly supportive of equal rights and women's rights and everything else, it seems to me that when we encourage, some people said, how can you? What's the need for this conversation? Men have it all. Come on, what's the need for this conversation? But I think we're expressing, what the need is, but also the recognition that not only men benefit from men owning all of themselves and being willing to do that work and turn inward and fill their cup up, but everyone benefits from that. Everyone. Women
Oh
benefit
yeah.
from that, kids benefit from that, other men benefit from that, because that's when, like, stepping into the more I talk about, masculinity and femininity, but in terms of divine masculine and toxic masculinity, and that's when there's an opportunity to step into that more divine aspect, that more soul aligned aspect
Mhm.
that lifts everybody up. Because then it's not about competition and tearing down and let me
Yeah.
belittle you so I can feel better. It's about there's plenty and I get to contribute in my big, bold, courageous, giving sort of protecting sort of way, from a guy perspective. And God, we all benefit from that. And
Totally.
and feeling like being in the presence of a man who holds all of that, can hold his divine masculine side and his divine feminine side all in one package with courage and confidence. That's the guy I wanna be hanging out with because that
Right.
feels totally different. Just energetically, I feel energy, but energetically, that feels totally different. And that's the kind of positive, world-changing, life-enhancing energy, in my opinion, that we need. And so the more we can
Yeah.
encourage that, God, the better the planet is.
Totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. You know, the reason I started doing this work was not because of men. It was because of the women that their little girls will become. So it was really
Yeah.
because of women that I started doing this work. I kind of looked at the state of women,
Mhm.
myself included, and said like, how can I contribute to this kind of mess that we're in as women? And I reverse engineered it and I brought it all the way back down and I thought, you know what? Like I got to work with dads
Mhm.
because they have such a huge impact in shaping the women that their daughters will become. So I kind of reverse engineered the whole thing of the crisis I see with women. Whereas a lot of it's coming from, a lot of it's coming from that primary relationship with their father. And so I looked at this giant knot and thought, do I want to work on the knot or do I want to like work on preventing the knot or like, and that's where it came to me to work with men who are raising daughters. And, you know, my work is continues to evolve to where I'm working with dads and starting to work with women, working with dads of adult daughters, a lot of whom are estranged and starting to work with women.
Yeah.
So I'm starting to kind of address the nod from all sides, if you will. But originally, what drove me there was, and my point in bringing that up is that healthy men change the world
Mhm.
because they have a huge impact on the people around them, their daughters, you know, their sons too. All they have a huge impact. We all impact each other, but especially, you know, men can have just a massive impact. And so the more that I can contribute to helping men
Yeah.
becoming more who they really are, becoming more in tune to their entire range of things, much in the way that you expressed as well, like that changes the world. Like men change the world. So it is something for all of society to help men. And what I realized is that, you know, there just aren't enough places and spaces and voices out there encouraging this from men. And they are so often put into these tiny boxes where they can't say anything. And so they're just cut off. And so somebody's got to get in there and
Yeah.
and wait for the well.
seems to me that being in those tiny boxes, being unable to express self, that's when acting out happens too,
Yeah.
you know?
Totally.
And when the whole power struggle, and I mean, there's plenty of examples of, not good behavior that's out there, but to me, that so much of that is symptomatic of these confines. And some people
Totally.
say, "Well, how can you even say that when we live in a patriarchal system?" And especially white guys have it made. They've got it all. And man, that box of what is okay, even in that setting, can be pretty damn suffocating. And I think it's that suffocation that leads to stuff that we have to heal from. Or
Absolutely. And these things are true. They are objectively true that men, and particularly white men, are in control of the power of majority of resources and things like this. That's true.
yeah,
I wouldn't say they have it all though,
right.
because I don't think anybody got a good seat on the Titanic with what's going on in our world right now.
No kidding. Yeah.
We
No.
have different we have different seats. We have different advantages, of course. I'm not disparaging or prioritizing anything around that. But we're all on a sinking ship, and that includes men.
Mhm.
And by and yet, men, and particularly white men, have a lot of power, resources, all these things. But the point that I feel so strongly about is they they need help too. The system is not benefiting anyone, including men, including white men. It's not to say that they don't have priority and privilege. Absolutely.
Yeah.
For sure. Undeniably. This is not about that specific piece. I'm not denying any of those things. They are true. And so why not find a way to help them break free of the prisons that are also confining them, especially since they do have most of the power and resources? Like, why not? And what I see so much is like, in what can be righteous anger about a lot of these things and these injustices, there's just a continued bashing and things like that. I've never seen bashing on people inspire change. I've
Bingo.
never seen emasculation inspire a man to do something differently or to have some self insight. So all of these, I think attempts that come from what can be, of course, righteous anger and indignation and injustice and all these things, they're not helping anything. They're not changing anything.
Mm.
No one is inspired by being criticized, bashed, emasculated. So I think what I'm about, and what I want to be about, is let's find a different way
Yeah.
to
And
work with people.
when we can align that power and those resources and urge them to be used from a place of soul aligned intention
Yeah.
rather than purely ego aligned intention, because we're willing to look inside, because men are willing to own all of themselves, even their feeling nature, even their intuitive nature, even all of these other things that they may be told aren't manly, which is bullshit. So much bullshit. When all of that's owned, then the opportunity to use that power and privilege and resources and whatever else on behalf of good for everyone is that much more feasible and possible.
Totally.
So
And
that's
it.
why I think it's so relevant. Yeah. Even looking at my own spiritual path, it was so hard for me for the longest time to like identify with a masculine god. And I know this is getting pretty off topic, but because I had my own daddy issues, and was
Mm.
largely raised by a single, strong single woman, this whole idea of, you know, dude on a mountain with a staff and a long beard ready to smite me or smote me or whatever for any
Spikes mode. I don't know.
I'm out, I just couldn't identify, and I really had to heal my own daddy stuff, for lack I mean, because it was the most important male relationship in my life for most of my life, and preventing the need for that, you know, to where
Yeah.
we could and as somebody even asked me or said recently, and I so appreciated this perspective, but he said, maybe your dad was just really trying to toughen you up and make you strong. Okay, well, it worked, in a lot of ways, but there may have been other ways to go about that, you know?
Right.
And so the influence is deep and real. And I think,
Yeah.
you know, men might not realize always how the influence that they have with their daughters or with the other women in their lives or even the men in their lives,
Hmm.
positive and negative. Um, but when those interactions can come from a place of I interviewed a guy this week, amazing a powerlifting champion, right? He was a championship powerlifter, owns a gym in Tulsa near where I live. But he talked about how he got into powerlifting because he had been bullied as a kid. He was a premature baby, always small, had been bullied, knew that changing his body might help change, that phenomenon of bullying. And so now he really helps people, men and women, both tap tap into their outer strength, but also their inner strength and
Mm.
power. It's a very philosophical, poetic approach. When I walked into his gym, it was like just books and best book collection I've seen outside of like a bookstore it was amazing. I had total book envy. But here this guy, I mean, he is strong and very masculine and the whole business. And he was talking about the thing that will change the world is love, kindness, compassion, working toward unity. And that it takes all people doing that, including and especially men being willing to step onto that path and promote kindness, love, compassion, unity, empathy, understanding, all of that, because it's going to take both genders to get there. And to hear this no one, no one would question this guy's, man card. We'll put it that way. Hear him talking like that was so inspiring to me
Yeah,
because this is what we need more of in the world. This
absolutely.
doesn't take a power lifter to get there, but this, yeah,
No, I totally agree. Anywhere that is giving men quote permission or inspiration or encouragement, particularly other men, is so inspiring. I was on a call last night. There's this amazing group called Everyman. It's
mm,
Everyman, if anyone wants to look it up. I'm so inspired by what they do. This is a group of men who have said, like, enough with all this crap, enough with all this, man box and toxic masculinity. Like, we're just not having it anymore. And so they do, well, in other times they do, and I think they've just restarted in-person retreats, wilderness retreats, lots of webinars and calls. But I'm on their mailing list and I'm in communication with them because I'm so inspired by their work. And I tell the men that I'm working with about it. And there's a couple of other organizations out there, but I think there just can't be enough, especially of men
yeah,
saying this to other men, because it's one thing for us to say it, right? Like, men are good and we have our part to play. And I think
time,
that, we do significant work and being women, like making a stand for this. But I think there's nothing more powerful than them getting to see other men saying things like that and kind of giving them permission and a model, because there is this misnomer that, like, if you're in touch with your spiritual side, then, that makes you less of a man, whatever that means or something. So for them to see whatever example of what it means to be a man to them expressing something different, I think is so, so incredibly powerful. And it's great to see examples. I want to check out your interview with this guy. And yeah, every
yeah.
man is awesome.
Thank you for sharing that. Anything else that you want to address today? Other
No, I think next time I want to talk about the concept of emasculation and the sort of rampant emasculation that happens, and kind of break that down a little bit and explain what that means. and
Mhm,
how it might be part of what men are feeling, um, that they probably can't really put a name or language to.
mhm.
That I think is this emasculation. We can talk about that. That's what I'd like to talk about. What about you?
That sounds like fun. I today has been a pretty far-reaching conversation, and I've enjoyed
Yeah,
it. It's been useful or insightful for others out there. Just, another thing to think about as we break this down a little bit. Sometimes you gotta break down to build up,
I
in
know.
a good way, understanding and awareness are the foundation for growth, and so the more we can shine a light and help that, become possible and remind men that joy is okay, happiness is okay, being all of you, owning all of your parts, mind, heart, you know, brawn, spirit, the whole business is okay,
It's
and
needed,
it's needed.
right? It's
Yeah,
needed.
and
It's
if you
what the
want
world needs.
your biggest contribution in your own personal life, in your family, in the world, owning all of those parts to yourself and bringing them to bear, for the benefit of, sure, others, but also for the benefit of yourself, and filling your cup back up and being able to serve from the overflow, and knowing that your happiness is part of what makes that possible over the long term, rather than, burning out early on or just being miserable and carrying that energy to everyone and everything, um, it's a whole different way to go through life and contributing. And so happiness and joy matter. That's that's my
Absolutely. I love it. I
yes.
love it.
Well,
All
thank
right.
you.
Well, thank you so much for this. If you're interested in learning more about her dad, please check the link. I'll drop a link in there. I offer a complimentary 15-minute chat, and I guarantee that you will leave there with at least one thing you can do as a dad to put a smile on your daughter's face. Check me out. I've got lots of videos and lots of tips and tricks for the life of a dad of a
Mm,
daughter.
love it, love it. And I'll put that link
Yeah.
in the show notes for this as well. And for anyone who's interested in really connecting more with their own inner power and with their own spirit, that intuitive joy, driven side of themselves that we talked about before, that's the playground on which I play, and love helping to guide men on that adventure, because ultimately it is an adventure and an exploration of self that can help them make an even bigger difference in the world. So I'll put information on my program in the notes as well. And until next time, I'm Lisa, and this is Claire, and thank you for watching Men Are Good.
Men are good.